Hey party members, welcome back to LARP 101. This is the one you've been waiting for. Okay, so in March this year I am off to a LARP called the Wild Hunt, an evening of mayhem and mystery surrounded by monsters, heroes and creatures from the great beyond, all of whom have been selected to join the Wild Hunt. Now if you're familiar with European folklore or with The Witcher 3, you may know a little bit about what I'm talking about. This video is part of a series of videos that I am doing showing you my prep that I am doing for that event, and this specific one is about how I built my character. Now I confess this was originally going to be a very long video, so I have split it in two, so you're going to have this one now and you're going to have another one in 2 weeks. So let's crack on and start building a dark fantasy character. Step 1, your concept. This is always going to be your starting point. You can't build a character without an idea. Now your idea could be a fictional character that you know from a TV show, a film or a book. It could be one that you've had floating in your head for a while, or it could be one that you just go, yes, that's what I want to play. So I struggled a lot when coming up with the concept for my character for the Wild Hunt. For some people, concepts can appear really quickly. For others like me, you can sit on it for days. So how do you think of a character concept when your head is completely void of ideas? Well, first, look at the brief that the event actually has. It could be just a backstory for the event, background for what the characters should be like, or it can even be a full-on brief about what your group or characters should be like in the game. For the Wild Hunt, I was really lucky and there was actually a brief for my in-game faction. Briefs for factions and groups are usually really great because not only do they contain the background of the group, they tell you what the motivation of your group is as a collective, and they even give you some ideas of what kind of people you would expect to find in that group. For example, the definition of what a family might be like, a military squadron, or even just a generalised adventuring party. These kind of briefs often make character building a lot easier because not only are you shown how you can build a character that complements the other characters in the group, but also you can make a character that essentially makes your group look stronger as a collective. I was put in the faction of the Chosen, who are essentially a group of heroes that have been chosen to join the Wild Hunt by the leaders of the hunt because of their brave and noble deeds. Our generalised theme is anger. We are the people who generally get violent and get stuck in when, you know, everything's going south. Or we're the ones causing everything to go south. We're very much the people of let's go in, do something and we'll worry about the consequences later. So knowing that and having that brief before me, I started looking for ideas in generalised media that would have that kind of character. This can be quite a long process if you have no idea what you want to play at all. So start looking at TV shows, films, books, video games, and even historical figures to give you some idea of what you want to play. I have to also confess, dark fantasy is not a genre that I am a massive fan of. So this event is really getting me out of my comfort zone and expanding my horizons. So looking for stuff that I would enjoy was a bit of an experience, but I think I've found something that will work. The obvious answer that I found was generally The Witcher. I'm a very big fan of the games, the books, obviously the Netflix series, which I have greatly enjoyed both seasons to some controversy, but you know, you do you, I'll do me. It is a little cliche because the Wild Hunt does feature a fair bit in the Witcher 3 video game, but I'm willing to look past that. So far doing really well on originality. But hey, it's a start. So you know what, I started looking at other Monster Hunter kind of characters from other media sources to see what else I could jumble together. I decided that if I want to be a monster hunter, it would probably be a good idea to think about what kind of monsters I would be fighting. And something stood out. Since I was probably about a teenager, I've been a big fan of the Fable video games. If you're not familiar with them, the games generally revolve around what is known as heroes. who are essentially mystical warriors of strength, skill and will, who go out, do quests, defeat monsters and generally save the world or make it worse depending on how you feel that day. Thinking about it, they're kind of like The Witcher but PG-13 version. But anyway, it doesn't matter about that. What matters is that there is a monster in the game known as the Balverine. The Balverine can only be described as a werewolf crossed with a pogo stick crossed with a billion kitchen knives. They are probably the first monster I ever encountered in a video game where I went, go away, go away, go away, go away, go away. Always. Or horrifying things, can't stand them. And just as a minor spoiler, there is a character who is discussed in these games who was quite well known for killing Balverines, and that is the hero known as Scarlet Robe. Now, I'm not going to lie, she's essentially Little Red Riding Hood, but so much more aggressive. She had a giant axe, and she was perfectly happy going about her life slaughtering Balverines as she went. And that kind of reminded me of another Little Red Riding Hood story that is close to my heart, which is the poem version from my childhood favourite author, Roald Dahl, in which the Little Red Riding Hood is confronted by the wolf and she unceremoniously pulls a gun from her underwear and shoots the wolf dead. And that is pretty much everything I want to be in life. It also kind of reminds me of Reva, who is another character from Fable who is for some reason well beloved by the Fable fan community and is also voiced by another hero of mine, the wonderful Stephen Fry. And that made me realise one very key thing for my character, which is that she's going to need a gun. So The Witcher, Little Red Riding Hood, a gun, something is coming together. So I wanted to flesh out the Little Red Riding Hood side of things a little bit more, so I decided to look into the history of the story. So while the origins of the Little Red Riding Hood story can be traced back all the way to ancient Greece, the actual written version first appeared in a collection of short stories. Now, contrary to popular belief, this was not the collection by the Brothers Grimm. It was actually in a collection called Stories and Tales from Past Times with Morals, also known as Mother Goose Stories. And that was written by an author called Charles Perrault in 1697, which is over 100 years before the Brothers Grimm wrote anything. So out of respect for Monsieur Perrault, I decided that a fun piece of history to also take into this character would be the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution did happen about 100 years after Stories or Tale from Past Times was actually written. And to truth be told, I did actually write an entire concept for a character that came from the time period of the book. And honestly, I didn't love it. I tried to love it, I really did. I just couldn't get behind it 100%. And frankly, it just seemed that the French Revolution was a far more dynamic time period, and it was just grabbing my attention far more than this end of the 17th century stuff that was going on with like the Sun King and all of that sort of jazz. It just wasn't what I wanted. And I'm a very strong believer that you need a strong character concept in order to play a LARP character. If you do not enjoy or love what is the foundation of your character, you're never going to really enjoy playing them. So it's perfectly all right to sketch out a whole thing, turn around, go, I don't love it, and throw it away. Enthusiasm for a character is the key thing when it comes to playing them. The French Revolution is a violent but also dynamic and extraordinary period of history, and it just seemed like the perfect place to slot in a gun-wielding monster hunter with an axe to grind. Somewhat literally. So now, as my own personal process, once I have my basic idea together, I tend to throw together a Pinterest board so that I can sort of see it all in images. If you want to have a look at that, the link to my Pinterest is in the bottom. I use it to flesh out a lot of character concepts and just sort of stick things to help make it all easier in my mind to see what I want. So if you fancy having a look, link is below. It also helps me to start fleshing out my costume, of which there is going to be an entire video about. So if you've not hit subscribe already, I recommend you do so, so you do not miss that video. Okay, step 2, the backstory. After your costume, backstory tends to be like the most important thing people focus on when they're building their character. It literally is like costume, backstory, everything else. Now, in a previous video, I described my personal method for building the backstories of my characters. It is not an original method, I'm not going to lie. It's something that I read online a few years ago. I thought it was really great, adapted it slightly for my own use, and I think it's a great tool to do it. I can't remember where I got it from or who wrote it, but if anyone knows, please tell me, because it's really, really good. And that method is essentially a 5-3-2-1 method. 5 significant events, 3 positive personality traits, 2 negative personality traits, and 1 secret. And this is a rather simplified method to allow me to build characters with a decent backstory, but not one that is so overly complex and over detailed that essentially it overshadows what I will be doing in the game. There's no real point in playing a character if I've already slayed the evil demon king, if you know what I mean. Each stage of this process allows me to add things to my character, flesh them out more, and turn them into something that generally resembles an actual person. So let's start with those 5 significant events, because that's what essentially makes up your wonderful backstory. So event 1, start at the beginning. It's always best to use event 1 to lay down the foundation of your character. So that is where they come from, who their family is, and generally what life they had right at the start. It doesn't need to be excessively detailed, it just needs to form a baseline so you can build the rest of that backstory on top. I want my character to have been born into a monster hunting clan. This can also be a bit cliche, but hey, I'm gonna go with it. The Little Red Riding Hood story stretches all the way back through time to the ancient Greeks, so the idea of having a clan that follows that backstory back and has this long tradition of young women killing wolves, that appeals to me. It also reminds me very much of a TV show that I love called Grimm, which is absolutely fantastic if you've not watched it, which is about essentially monster hunters descended from these long bloodlines of other hunters trying to slay monsters in the modern world. So, very appropriate. What's also great about sort of having this little foundation event is that it can actually say a lot about your character without you actually having to say much. For instance, saying my character was born in a monster hunting clan immediately implies a rather unconventional childhood, which can lead me on into some rather interesting events. And that brings me on to event 2, which is essentially a formative event. So as a minor backstory on this, I've been rather obsessed with doing scar makeup for this character. I'm going to give it a go. If it goes well, I'll even show you how to do it, but I have been rather obsessed with it. So if I'm going to give my character big facial scars, I kind of need a reason as to why. And that's where the formative event comes in. Formative events are essentially events that shape your character, who they are and how they see the world. It doesn't have to be extreme, deadly kind of thing. It can be quite normal, like having a school bully, meeting a mentor, or just witnessing something interesting in your life. But it should be something that explains why your character sees the world in a particular way. And this can also be the event that takes your character from the mundane world of event 1 and propel them into the more interesting dynamic world of event 2. Similar to how Frodo was given the One Ring, or to Luke Skywalker meeting Obi-Wan Kenobi. So taking that in terms of my character, we can build on that moment. So we've established that if you're raised in a Monster Hunter clan, odds are you're going to have a rather interesting childhood. And I like the idea of a family tradition that is a little bit dark and a little bit violent. And the idea that came to me was essentially this tradition of sending young girls off into the woods in bright red cloaks to lure out werewolves. A sort of, you know, a semi-gory rite of passage. Sending little girls out into the woods in little red cloaks to lure out wolves does seem a little twisted, but this is a dark fantasy / horror LARP. So, you know, I think we can get away with it. It's kind of par for the course, really. So when my character went through this, let's say something went a little bit wrong and the wolf nearly killed her. Obviously her family's not gonna let that happen, so they all come in with their axes blazing and the wolf takes off, but not before shredding up the poor little girl's face. Sure, it didn't kill her, but she's always gonna have that glorious souvenir to remind her, and that's when she starts this vendetta against this one particular wolf. Okay, so we're now 2 events down, we've got 3 to go, and one of those events is going to need to be how I get into the Wild Hunt. So we'll leave that one for a second and we're going to focus on event 3 and event 4, for which I'm going to give essentially a victory to my character and a defeat. So the victory is to prove she's epic, because she is, and I want people to see her that way, and the defeat to give her some challenges. It'll make her a little bit more vulnerable than just having her always win would. Now, controversial opinion, I have no issue with characters that always win. I have no issue with characters that are generally defined as the Mary Sue. And one day I will do an entire video to explain to you all why I have no issue with Mary Sue characters, and I will be promptly shunned off the internet for all time. But before you all start banging away on your keyboards to tell me your opinions about Mary Sue's, that is not this video. I'm not doing it right now, so let's put a pin in that discussion and we'll come back to it in a little bit. Let's get back to my character and we'll talk about event 3, the defeat. And this is where I'm bringing the French Revolution in. One of my most favourite events in history is the storming of the Bastille. I think it is one of the most interesting parts of the French Revolution, and I desperately want my character to be a part of it. So this is where a lot of research comes in, because when you're taking something from a culture or a history that is different from your own, it is so important to make sure you do the reading so that you can respect it appropriately. If you don't, at best you'll look like you don't really care, at worst you'll be downright offensive. I am not French, and the French Revolution is obviously one of the founding elements of France today and is a big part of their national culture. So I want to make sure that I understand that and that I understand where they're coming from. There is a character from this period that I can take advantage of though. In the accounts of the storming, there is some tales of a comte who was imprisoned in the tower for a rather gruesome murder. However, there is no record of what happened to him during the storming or after, and because of that, some people think that he wasn't even real and that he essentially was a fictional character added to people's retelling of the story to give it flavour. And if he didn't possibly exist, I'm going to use him to be my werewolf. You see, my wonderful character, having hunted down this werewolf that's scarred her face for many years, finds out he's in the Bastille. She gets in contact with some of her rebellious friends in Paris who are already dissatisfied with the French government. We're planning the riot anyway, and she gives them the idea to break into the Bastille as well. The crowd gets in, she comes in with them, slips into the cells to find this wonderful comte, gets into a brawl with him, and he gets away. And she, tail between her legs, slips out with the rest of the crowd, having lost her quarry. And that can lead into her being a massive part of the revolution, fighting monsters and vampires that have entrenched themselves into the French nobility, and essentially executing them as she goes, ridding the world of werewolves, vampires and other monstrosities. All under the guise of being a French revolutionary. But that still means she needs to get to that werewolf, and that leads on to event 4, my victory. Victories are always fun to write. They're kind of a demonstration of how epic your character actually is. And it's always good to have a really fun, interesting one in your backstory. And you want to make it as believable as possible. If you go over the top with it and say something happened to your character that you can't back up in game, people are going to generally not believe you. So keep in mind that fights are generally not one-sided. You don't just walk in, defeat the guy and leave. Take a few hits, suffer a wound, maybe even nearly die. This needs to be probably one of the toughest fights your character has ever had, but then you win. These kind of stories give your character a sense of mortality, but also show how they can overcome it. And while that sounds a little bit cliche and dramatic again, it's still good to have that element in there. So mine is going to be that my character finally found the Comte again. She was tracking him for years. She went through all these vampires and werewolves, executing them, you know, guillotines, axe, guns, as she went. But she finally tracked down the Comte and cornered him in a back alley in Paris. And after a rather brutal fight, she shoots him dead. I think my character needs that win for herself, you know, to defeat her white whale. Because there's no real point in this wolf still being around for the actual game. And I'm talking about my game in particular because essentially it's a one-night event. I probably won't be attending any other. There's very little chance that this wolf is going to show up, so it's easier just to kill them off, so that part is essentially closed off. And I don't always recommend really that you close off your character's backstory. You generally want to leave it open so that plot writers can use it to tailor a plot to you. But one of the requirements for my character brief was that my character needed an epic event that would get her brought into the Wild Hunt, and slaying this white whale of hers is probably the simplest way to do that. And that brings me on to my fifth and final event of my backstory, the Catalyst event. So the Catalyst event is essentially probably the most important part of your entire backstory, because it is essentially the reason as to why you are at your LARP event in the first place and what your purpose is for being there. Having lived during the French Revolution, my character will have been a member of the Wild Hunt for 3 centuries. And the whole point is that she did something really cool to join the Wild Hunt. Because that is essentially the whole point of the Chosen. They were selected for a reason. And that involves Rebecca. So who's Rebecca? Well, one of the things that the event organisers encouraged the players of the Wild Hunt to do was to essentially form bonds and alliances between different characters in order to build a cumulative backstory. Joint backstories are great because they allow you to have relationships with characters that are already pre-established, and they're also great for plot writers to do some joint plot for you all. So I got in touch with other players to see if any of them wanted to be my sponsor, essentially the person who brought me into the Wild Hunt. And one of the Splendid players messaged me back. Now the Splendid are essentially Fae. They are the original members of the Wild Hunt. They are essentially at the top of the food chain, and the character's name is Rebecca, not the player name, but in respect for their privacy I'm not going to obviously go into who they are. But Rebecca essentially saw my character have her fight with this werewolf and was impressed by it enough to offer her support and patronage. And let's be frank, this fight with this werewolf's probably not gone very well. I can see my character's lying in an alleyway, bleeding to death from, you know, being clawed open by this wolf that she's shot dead on the floor. So when this Splendid comes up and offers her a chance at immortality and the freedom to go and hunt as many monsters as she wishes, that's not really an opportunity she's going to pass up. So I had a chat with Rebecca's player, and this is kind of the backstory that we agreed upon. And essentially, as a fae, Rebecca offered my character a deal. She would save my life and let me hunt whatever I wanted, and in return, I would hunt some things she wanted me to hunt. Essentially, I would be her supernatural hitman. And being a monster hunter by profession and lifestyle, there's absolutely no way my character would say no. And that's how 300 years in the Wild Hunt began. And that's the point where the game would essentially begin. So let's summarize those 5 events one more time, just to single them all out and make them as easy to follow as possible. So event 1, my character was born into a family of monster hunters. Event 2, she went through a trial as a child to help catch a werewolf and got her face bloodied up and the wolf got away. Event 3, she helped instigate the storming of the Bastille to get into the prison to kill the said werewolf, and he still got away. Event 4, she eventually tracks him down in a Parisian alleyway, defeats him and nearly dies in the process. And event 5, she makes a deal with a fae to live forever and to hunt monsters for as much as she wants in exchange for being a supernatural hitman. Considering how long this video is, that seems really short and simplified. It all sounds kind of basic when you say it like that, but it does give a lot of scope for a well-constructed backstory, and it gives room for embellishment and improvisation as the event goes on. Well, that was quite long, but it looks like we've made it out the other side. So let's take a break and we'll visit the other half of my character build in about 2 weeks' time. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, and if you haven't hit the little bell already, make sure you do so now so that you get notified when the second half of the character build video comes out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're staying happy, I hope you're staying healthy, and I will see you on a battlefield soon.